Due to the large gap between the rich and the poor in India's economy, it is impossible for it to have the real estate boom and car entry boom that China had in the past. What should China do next with such a large production capacity and related enterprises? Looking at the world, let's look at China. One of the goals of Trump's team to make America great again is to maintain and sustain a certain output of the US steel industry, and its opponent is China's steel industry. Now China's steel industry has produced more than 1 billion tons of steel per year for many consecutive years, accounting for more than half of the world's output. The Financial Times in London predicts that the supercycle of China's steel industry has ended. As a strategically significant steel industry, Chinese are concerned about two issues. One is how Chinese steel companies can transform and upgrade. On the other hand, the Financial Times also predicted that the global metal war has begun. If you are interested in related topics, please click to follow, like and collect. From 2000 to 2020, China's steel industry has ushered in an unprecedented supercycle in the history of world steel. To what extent is this supercycle? In the past 20 years, China's total steel consumption is equivalent to twice the total steel consumption of the United States in the entire 20th century. The rapid and large-scale development of China's steel industry has also supported China's current manufacturing and real estate industries. This supercycle of steel has of course also driven the supercycle of raw materials such as iron ore and coking coal. Several major mining companies that everyone knows, such as Vale and Rio Tinto, have made a lot of money. We can calculate that in the past 20 years, the net profit earned by Vale and Rio Tinto from iron ore may exceed $100 billion each. So their industry insiders joked that these companies are not mining, but digging money directly from the ground. From a macro perspective, the sales of these iron ores have brought great help to the Australian economy. In the past 20 years, Australia is the only developed country that has not experienced a recession. Of course, this is not the case during the new crown. On the Brazilian side, Luna's first term also relied on the sales of related raw materials such as iron ore, and the Brazilian economy once entered a golden period. As we all know, all cycles have ups and downs. Now China's steel consumption has indeed come down from the peak. In the past few years, China's annual per capita steel consumption has actually exceeded that of developed countries such as the United States. Chinese said that China's per capita steel consumption has exceeded that of developed countries. That is to say, the next supercycle of the steel industry will be driven by India. It should be said that India is still far behind, and it may never drive the next cycle. Because India's steel production is only 1/8 of China's. Due to the large gap between the rich and the poor in India's economy, it is impossible for it to have the real estate boom and car entry into home boom that China had in the past. With such a large production capacity and such a large number of related companies in China, what should China do next? This is the metal war described by the Financial Times in London. This is a global metal war. The first is other countries in the world. The Financial Times suggested how they could contain China's steel exports. China's steel exports include both the export of its own steel products and the export of continuously upgraded steel products. Because now only 1/10 of China's steel products are exported, you can think about it. 1/10 is 100 million tons of exports, and if it is 2/10, it is 200 million tons of exports. Moreover, the quality of exports from building materials to plates is getting higher and higher, and the added value is getting higher and higher. Another thing that may not be paid enough attention to is that steel products, such as automobiles and ships, are also beginning to be exported in large quantities. This is the point that China, which is attacked by the West every day, is exporting excess production capacity. This is destined to be a major highlight of global trade under Trump's trade protection policy in the next few years, and it may also be an important highlight for Western countries to unite to deal with China. China's steel companies are becoming less and less costly and more efficient. For example, a private coastal steel company with more than 10,000 employees, and its annual output reached 15 million tons. This cost-effectiveness is basically unbeatable for some domestic companies. Of course, these companies themselves are also constantly making steel products with higher added value. Third, China's metal companies in a broad sense are shifting from steel-based to metal, and are turning to metal manufacturing in all fields. For example, the emerging strategic metal industry now includes more and more copper used in electric vehicles and green power grids in the future, as well as lithium and rare earth and other related metals. Why are these metals called strategic metals? From the recent developments of the Sino-US trade war, it is said that China has begun to restrict the export of these metals to the United States. Chinese see that in the past 16 years, with the full development of China's supply chain, the mining, refining and purification of these metals, most of the production capacity is also in the hands of Chinese companies, including refining in China. This is also the positive result of the joint action of China's stock market and the Belt and Road Initiative in the past decade. Because Chinese companies have basically achieved a global layout of raw materials, from a broader perspective, these are all major highlights of the future global metal war. I am concluding this argument with my final remarks based on the economic facts. China's steel industry produces over 1 billion tons annually, accounting for more than half of global output. Between 2000 and 2020, China experienced an unprecedented supercycle of steel consumption, supporting the country's manufacturing and real estate boom. This steel boom led to significant profits for major mining companies like Vale and Rio Tinto, benefiting economies such as Australia and Brazil. China's per capita steel consumption has exceeded that of many developed nations, indicating that future demand growth is limited. With India being far behind in production and infrastructure development, it is unlikely to drive the next global steel cycle in the same way China did. Chinese steel companies are shifting to higher value products such as automotive and shipbuilding materials. Although only 10% of China's steel output is currently exported, this still represents over 100 million tons. China is steadily increasing both the quantity and quality of its exports, causing concern among other global economies. Western countries, particularly the US under Trump's trade protection policies, are exploring ways to contain China's steel exports. In addition to steel, China has expanded its focus on strategic metals like copper, lithium, and rare earth elements, which are crucial for electric vehicles and green energy infrastructure. China is reportedly restricting the export of strategic metals to the US as a countermeasure in the ongoing trade war. The Financial Times refers to this competition as a global metal war, with Western countries potentially collaborating to curb China's influence in key metal markets. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, has enabled Chinese companies to secure raw material supplies globally, strengthening their control over the mining, refining, and production of critical resources. Chinese steel companies are becoming increasingly cost-effective and efficient, with some private firms producing 15 million tons annually at low costs. This competitive edge puts pressure on both domestic and international rivals, particularly in markets that rely heavily on traditional, high-cost manufacturing. China's steel and metal industries remain globally dominant but are undergoing significant transformation to adapt to lower domestic demand. Strategic diversification into higher-value metal products and export-driven growth is crucial for maintaining global competitiveness. The global response, led by Western protectionist policies, underscores the growing importance of trade strategy and resource control in international relations. This Chinese argument reflects a complex interplay of economic strategy, industrial policy, and geopolitical rivalry shaping the future of global metal and trade markets. It is true that China is the world's largest steel producer, producing over 1 billion tons of steel annually. The steel supercycle, 2000 to 2020, significantly boosted China's manufacturing and real estate sectors. Global mining giants like Vale and Rio Tinto have made significant profits from selling iron ore to China, contributing to the economic stability of Australia and Brazil. China holds a dominant position in the production and refinement of strategic metals such as rare earth elements, lithium, and copper, which are essential for electric vehicles, EVs, and green infrastructure. There have been instances where China imposed export controls on strategic metals, particularly in response to trade tensions with the United States. The US and other Western countries have implemented protectionist measures to counter China's influence in global markets. Former President Donald Trump's trade policies, including tariffs on Chinese goods, were aimed at reducing the US trade deficit and protecting domestic industries. The Chinese assert that India cannot drive the next steel cycle due to economic disparity, but this claim is debatable. The Chinese go to the references of the Financial Times. The idea that Western countries would unite in a coordinated effort to block China's steel and metal exports is right. The Chinese argument includes claims, likely designed to bring interest or discussion on global trade and resource control.